Good morning, church, and happy Sabbath. Pardon? Thank you. Yes, I did. And they told me it's a winter cut. And my wife said, what will be the summer cut look like? So I don't know. It's short already, so anyways, I'm very happy. Don't you enjoy the weather? Come on. I was 17 and I was prepared to serve the Russian army, which I never came to. And our colonel general said, guys, if you don't study diligently here, I'll make sure that you come to a place where you're going to use a rope to go to the outhouse. We all know what outhouse is, right? And by the rope. And here we are in Michigan. But we're not in the Soviet army enlisted, but in God's army enlisted, right? Anyways, I do enjoy the weather. And I see that your body temperature is also hot because we got it to 70-something in here. Just few of us. Anyways, I'm happy to be here today and to stand. And I hope you had a good week. But it's also good to leave the week behind when we come to the Sabbath day. And sometimes it's very hard, even for me as a pastor, which I'm very connected to this church and the other church, sometimes to make a break when the holy hours start on Friday night. Because it's all about the church, about the building, about the people. And sometimes I have a hard time to leave it behind because it pushes. So may God give us the strength, that we enter into the rest, which talks about in book of Hebrews, by faith and leaving everything that is not partaking to the Sabbath, outside of the Sabbath, because we want to enjoy the Sabbath and we want to enjoy God's presence as well. But sometimes our minds are still in the world and still around the church, maybe good things, but those things can wait. And so I appeal to you to fight that good fight and leave those things behind. And when the Sabbath comes, that we enter with reverence the holy hours. And we keep the holy Sabbath until the day is over, the 24 hours, because this is a time where the Lord wants to meet with us. And also keep the edges of the Sabbath. Am I fainting out? Keeping the edges of the Sabbath is so important because we're honoring Him. And we're not honoring the Sabbath, but we're honoring the Lord of the Sabbath, who created the Sabbath, who wants us that we come to Him together weekly and spend time together. And what is more important than our lives? There is nothing more important. And if you would take your last breath and then you ask yourself, was there anything more important than my life? Sometimes we can be very enthusiastic and caught up with things, and would partake our things around us, home or church. But those holy hours are given to us to spend our time with the Lord. So please look into your life, and as I do myself, I do look into my life, and I wrestle with myself. I said, this is for the week, this is Sabbath, leave it behind. I have to talk to myself. I need to train myself. And Apostle Paul uses a very good analogy when he says, I can walk, very good. He uses an analogy when you go to the Old Testament or New Testament, you see the priests or Levites, they would wear a dress, male and female, long dress. And when they walk slowly. But when they want to walk faster, they lift up their clothing so they go fast and even run. And so Apostle Paul uses an analogy that we should bring every thought into captivity to Christ, meaning we picking us up, and then we can go faster. The same for us on the Sabbath, that we wrap our minds around God. and godly things, and not allowing anything to come in these holy hours, because I call it the time of reset. We have the 6 days a week, but the Sabbath is a day of rest. A rest that we can re-energize, we get recharged. And sometimes, and even many times, I have seen myself, that topic was so important. It goes up to the Sabbath, and I want to finish it, but the time runs out. I have to leave it, and then I enjoy the Sabbath, and the sunset is done on Sabbath evening, and then I realize it wasn't so important. Sometimes Satan has this power to make it an important thing to us, and it will even maybe give us the idea that it's very important. So let us be diligent, and only we can do it on ourselves as we train our minds, and help us ourselves to bring our mind into captivity, every thought into captivity to Christ. This is our battle, and we battle this every day. As you can imagine, I like this more because I can see you. So this battle, because this will determine at the end who we are in love with. That's very important, who we are in love with. And I read something very interesting this week, and kind of was an eye-opener. And it says here, what you do not change, you choose. That's good. I do push-ups in the morning, and I do 30, 50 of them push-ups. And sometimes I don't do those push-ups, and then I say, what you don't change, you choose. So if I don't change my prayer habits and pray to the Lord, I choose not to pray. If I don't choose to do maybe 51 push-ups or 52 push-ups, and every day going higher and higher, I choose to stay where I am. Again, what you don't change, you choose. This morning, I would like to go with you into the scriptures and talk a little bit about Joshua. Joshua is a name that we know in English, but it's very interesting that in Russian, it has the same pronunciation as Jesus. So Joshua is the name Jesus, Yeshua. If you go to Hebrew, Yeshua, Yahweh, so in Russian is Jesus is Joshua. Joshua is Jesus. It is so in Greek, in Hebrew, in Greek as well. So in Hebrew. So if we read about Joshua, it's actually pronounced Jesus in the original. So let's see. And Joshua is the name that, has the roots for Jesus in the New Testament, and he is the conqueror. He conquers the land. So let's go to the chapter 4 of Joshua. And thank you, El David, for reading this. It's very interesting how this story, when I read this, it always gives me the energy to, to fight my battles. It came to pass, in verse 1, when all people had completely crossed over the Jordan, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, take for yourself 12 men from the people, 1 man from each tribe, and command them, saying to take for yourself 12 stones from here out to the midst of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood firm, and you shall carry them over with you and leave them in the lodging place where you lodging tonight. 12 tribes of Israel, and each of them supposed to take one of the stones. And I did some research, and if I would ask you what kind of stones they would be, you would say they are polished stones because they're underneath the water. And how heavy do you think they were? We can go with pounds, but they need to go kilograms. Pounds. Just imagine adult man, tall, military, and not asking for a pebble or a little rock. So they're supposed to bring up some heavy rocks out of the bed of the Jordan. And 12 of them. I saw some commentators say so 50 to 75 pounds carrying on their shoulders. And they carry them out and they put them at the lodging place. I want to ask you a question. When you go to bed, do you fall asleep right away? Sometimes. So what are the thoughts there? Oh, this pastor. This elder. Oh, this neighbor. Husband. Children, I would expect more, And those thoughts are with us. And they don't give us rest. But see, very interesting here that he said, take those rocks or stones and put them at the lodging where you lodge tonight. And now these people, they came from the desert, from the slavery, and there's the second generation. The first generation didn't pass. The first generation, all of them have died in the desert. Even Moses, who was the humblest man on earth, even he didn't make it. Aaron died because he rebelled with Miriam, and Miriam was laid to rest. And then it says in Deuteronomy 8, chapter 9, and I would like to read this Deuteronomy. Moses talks about Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 8 and 12. Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 8, it says, also in Horeb you provoked the Lord to wrath, so that the Lord was angry enough with you to have destroyed you. And so Moses, before he, is taken away from his people, makes this long speech in the chapter 9, and he recalls all the incidents that happened to the desert and why they didn't enter the promised land. But now, those people who are here at the Jordan, they are entering the promised land. Entering the promised. The second generation, we have Joshua, and we have also Caleb, those two. And those two are the leaders who making it to the desert for 40 years, and now they enter the promised land. And the Jordan, it could be no any other time when the Lord asked him to take over Jericho and cross the Jordan River. It was the harvest time. And when there's harvest, what happens? We don't know it in our Western world, but when we have rain, thank you. When we grow tomatoes or potatoes or plants in the garden, we need to rain. We need to rain in the spring and the latter rain. That's why the Bible talks about the early and the latter rain. So we need, and they had, the river was flooded, and I can imagine those enemies on the other side were just looking at them. These folks tried to conquer something. And somebody said that this river was so fast, the current was so strong, and also the width was very far. And the year was 1406 before Christ. It's very, very interesting that in 1854, an expert swimmer tried to cross that river where across the Jericho is, and he couldn't because the current was too strong and the width was too wide. He couldn't make it, and here the Lord opens the river so the people can cross. Where are your struggles today to cross the Jordan? We're standing at the edge where we want to enter the promised land into heaven. Is there anything in our lives that holds us back? Holds us back not to be able to cross. And it's very interesting that when they crossed the Red Sea, Moses had the command to use the rod, but this time was different. The priest had to go ahead, and as soon as they stooped into the water, it parted. How many times in our lives we're waiting for a miracle? We're waiting for a miracle to happen before believing in acting upon it. waiting for a miracle to happen without stepping into by faith. Because we're holding and waiting that miracle should happen, but not going into that. And they enter, and as soon as they entered, is in chapter 3, as soon as they feed, in verse 13 it says, and it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priest who bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of Jordan, that the waters of Jordan shall be cut off, the waters that came down from upstream, they shall stand as a heap. Only by faith it was possible for them to cross the Jordan. But it's interesting that he said, take 12 stones out of the bed where the priest stood, you put it where you lodge. And later it will be put up into Gilgal, the city, as a memory. But what he also does, he asked the priest, and Joshua himself in verse 9, he says, then Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan at the place where the feet of the priest who bore the ark of covenant stood, and they are till this day. Not only they took 12 stones with them where they traveled, but they also built an altar, you could say, midst in the river. And you would ask yourself, why would they do that? What are your thoughts on that? Why would God ask them to build a monument, you could say, of 12 rocks in midst of the river? A reminder, very good. That was very sketchy. But you went out by faith. A reminder. But what is the reminder for if the river overflows and you don't see them? I'll make you think. Your answers. The river does not always overflow. It's only in the spring and in the fall. And so when the water falls, you can see the monument. So the Lord tried to put in their minds that I was so powerful to part the Jordan that you can walk through. But when they went to different feasts during the years, and we have the southern 2.5 tribes in the south, they will pass and they will see that monument that was built on the bed of the sea, of the river. You know, sometimes in our lives we forget that the Lord has opened the Jordan. And even sitting today is an opening, because if the Lord wouldn't open the way for us today, we wouldn't be here today. The opening, understanding that the Lord cares for us, and He, that the Almighty who parts the sea and let them come through. So A, He asked them, take 12 stones and bring them at your place of your lodging. And B, build one there that you have a vivid or a visual monument that I am so powerful to part the sea, the river or the sea. 12 stones, and that as a reminder. Where are the stones in your life that you have? When you look back, you see them. Do you remember any stones in your life where you picked up and saw them as a memory, what the Lord has done for you? Anyone? Well, we're healthy. There's a praise, right? Isn't it? We have some people sick, but they are got well. We're easily to forget things. We are in the church praising God. That's a good one. It was in 2015, my professor called me and said, can you help me out? I need somebody in Southern California, in San Diego, to preach to a group of people. And I went with him the year 2014 to the West Coast, in 2013 to East Coast. So he knew me, he invited me to come and to preach. And then he said, it's a good group of people, you can speak to them and they will accept you. Will probably baptize 200 people. And I said, let me think about this. Then he said, it will be a big church, 850 people. So now, any one of you who is courageous enough to speak to 850 people, raise your hand. I got so worried about speaking to those 850 people. He said, Pastor Alex, they're from all over the world. I said, my accent, and I'm just from Germany. He said, don't worry, you will do just fine. Just preach as you usually do, it's all good. And I got so scared, and I got even sick about the worry. So I called and said, well, I have to say no because I don't feel well, and I got scared. You know, it's good to look into ourselves and see what we are capable of and admit our shortcomings or who we are. But I think more important is to look to God, who is able to do those things which we cannot. That's why we have our Lord in heaven. And I didn't go, and I don't know what will happen today. I didn't go because I was so afraid. The year passed, and he called me again. I said, do you want to go this time to Kentucky? It's a smaller congregation, and you can preach there. I said, okay, let me talk to my wife at home, and I will come up. We talked and said, okay, it's not far from here, maybe we can somehow arrange this. Because going away for 5-6 weeks is a long time from the family in the summer. I said, yes, I will go, I told him. He said, no worries, it's a very good congregation, a small congregation. I came there, and indeed, it were 16 people on the book, 8 only attending. You ask what you get? Sometimes we think we know what we ask, or we know this fits us. Give me, Lord, give me a small church, a smaller church. I don't want a big church. The Lord gave me a smaller church. But He was also gracious enough to give us 29 people who were visiting that night. So I was not among 8 people, but we were in Lawrenceburg, and 29 people came that night and listened to us. So we need to be very careful how our faith is and what we ask for. So that's why the sermon today is not by sight, but by faith. And I admire the leader Joshua. He takes over now Moses, who was established leader. He comes over to his new position, and he entrusted these 2 million people, if you count the children and mothers and adults, about 560,000 adults, and then children, families, about 2 million. And he has now the goal to bring them in the promised land. For 40 years they have been wandered to the desert, and now the time has come to go to the Jordan and enter and possess the country that God has promised them to give, even through Abraham, Isaac, and Isaac. And now they are at the verge of crossing the Jordan, and I imagine that there were people who would say to Joshua, let's hold a minute, let's think and talk. Did you see that river? Do you see the current? And do you see us? And look at them. They have fortified cities, and we are here, and we're supposed to cross this river. What do you expect from us? And he's brand new in his ministry, because Moses failed to represent the character of God, and now he is retired. He's died, and the Lord took him to heaven, but now is the new leader with his goal to take the people over the Jordan. For 40 years they have waited. And when I read this story, for me it's like seeing your father, your mother, and uncle, and aunts, and all have passed away, and now you, the young generation, are left, and now you have to go. Now you have to fulfill the promise that God has given to you. There's no one else. Either you will check out and don't go, or you go. And he stands and he talks to people and he receives from God instructions what to do. And he asked the priest to go into and we know the priest was Eleazar. And they go ahead with faith that the Lord will part the Jordan and they will go and cross over and take over the Jericho. Sometimes I look into my life and I see challenges and I see, in Germany we say Prüfungen and exams, and I ask myself, how is this going to work? If I use all my knowledge, all my skills, all my rational, and I put together, it will not work. But then I think on the other side, on faith. So if we are Christians, if we don't have faith, then who are we? Where do we get our faith? How are we different from others if we come just to church on one day on the Sabbath and just sit here and not exercise our spiritual muscles? And we choose. What do you don't change? You choose. And if I don't change the things I do, then I am happy with what I have. But if you're not happy with what you have, then you start praying, don't we? We go pray. And sometimes when we go in this dialogue with God and wrestling with Him and praying and listening and praying and listening and again and praying, we establish a relationship. And He hears us, we hear Him. Then He gives ideas and we rub off our ideas. And then this is how it goes. And one day I was sitting in Germany, it was 2011, I was sitting there and the Lord impressed me to go to Andrews University and to study there. And I said, Lord, that's a different country. And those people are speaking English. How about me? I finished my degree and I was happy to be in Germany. I speak besides German and Russian fluent, and took some French. Said, I'm happy. Why would I go there? If you ask me, I could be a janitor all my life. No stress. You do your work and people like what you clean. I did it for 6 years in Andrews University. I stood up in the morning, 5 o'clock, and 5 start to 7, and then later, But the Lord doesn't ask us, and thank you for the story this morning, He doesn't ask us what we want, but He tells us what we need to do. And sometimes we don't like the idea, like helping that butterfly, to make it easy. Sometimes we try to make it easy for us, but the easy part is not always the easier one. Sometimes the Lord wants to change us, and we don't even see what the change is needed. And so I was sitting there, and they said, how about you go there to study? And I said, well, Lord, first of all, that's English. Secondly, it's a different country. And I don't speak that English that well, and I have to fly there. And he said, well, how about you start with what you can do? And I said, went online, I looked up, and they indeed offer an English class there, summer class. It was like $4,000 something. I said, well, that's going to be difficult, to pay for that class for 1 month. But I prayed, I said, Lord, you're asking me to go in a different country. You're asking me to take this exam. You're asking me to understand this and do it in English. And beside that, I had to take the GRE. I had to take the Hebrew and Greek exams, all in English. I said, Lord, maybe you should ask somebody else to do that. Aren't we sometimes in our lives the same way? Couldn't Joshua just said, Lord, use somebody else. Why you choosing me to do this task? What if the water will not part? What if we fail? What if the enemy will attack us? And just imagine, we safe in the desert here, and now we cross into the Jordan and come over, and the enemy will attack us because now we're in the promised land. And now we're on the territory of the enemy. Here on this side, we're safe. Okay, we have snakes, but you provide us with food and manna, we have water. Why don't we just stay here? Sometimes in our lives, we like the desert. We like the desert so much because it doesn't take much effort. We like our little routines in life. We don't want to change this. And I'm talking just to you, I'm talking to everyone who listens online, and talk to myself first of all, because this is how human nature is. We don't like big changes. We like to be the quotas tour they were called, And so but the Lord is persistent. And if you're faithful to Him and pray to Him, He will push you. He will not push you the way that people may be pushed, but He will not leave you alone until you do it. And I think as a leader, as a parent, as mother and father, we know that we need to do some things at home in order to change something. We have to do that. We have to approach. We need to wait for a good time, but we need to do that. This only when we're faithful stewards, because we need to stand up as a man, as a woman. We need to say, we cannot be quiet. We need to say if it's wrong, then we need to stand up and say, that's wrong. And so the Lord says, okay, get up and buy you a ticket and go there and take the exam. I said, Lord, let me go check first how much the ticket is. So I went there and checked. It was Frankfurt O'Hare Airport in Chicago, $500 euros, which is equal to 500 US. I said, okay, I can live with that. I can spend that. Now I have to take to my wife and talk to her about this, what plans I have for a whole month, to take that class. And we agreed, and I went and I bought the ticket, and I went on, and I didn't know where I am flying to. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what will happen. I didn't know anything. But I knew there was English had to pass, GRE I took twice, 5 hours you sit in one room, Hebrew and Greek, and I had to do that. As I went in to that room, there was the lady who did the English class, and she said, oh, you're the 5th pastor. Now I can offer you a different class. Now she could accommodate a different class, not the class which cost $4,500. Now she could accommodate a different class, and she put me in a different class, but before that she took a test and just to see where my English knowledge was, and then she said, okay, you need to this, this, and this class you need. At the end, out of 4,000 something, they charged me $80. Just imagine I would stay in Germany and looked at this big bill which is there, and would never make a move. I wait by sight, not by faith. Joshua, he has his army responsibility, families, mothers, and children, grandchildren, but also the heavy load of a leader responsible for all of them. And now he leads them, and first of all, to the waters, trusting that the Lord will part, that the Lord brought us till here, that He will bring us also through. Sometimes we forget the past, how the Lord led us, then we also struggle with the future. And so I came to the class and I passed. English was a little bit more than expected, they needed. And then I took on Friday my Hebrew, and on Monday my Greek, and on Tuesday was on a plane flying home. It's all easy to say afterwards, but when you're in midst of it, the uncertainty, the pain, but this is how the butterfly learns to fly. This is how we as Christians learn to fly. This is how Christians, we trust in God by faith, allowing Him to grow us in such a way that we are different than other people. Not that we are better, but we're different because we're relying on God and trusting on God. And thirdly, not only they took stones out where the lodging place is as a constant reminder that the Lord brought them to this river. As a constant reminder that these stones will be put up in Gilgal so people can see that they went to the Jordan. But they also built a monument of the bed of the river. Every time they would pass and there would be a law of water, they would see how their parents went through that. That's why in verse 6, chapter 4 says, that this may be a sign among you and your children, and when your children ask in time to come, saying, what are these stones mean to you? Then you shall answer them, and that the waters of Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord when it crossed over the Jordan. The waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be for a memorial to the children of Israel forever. You know, the Lord, He makes miracles in lives. But only if we follow Him, we can experience them. Only when we trust Him, we can see those miracles. But if we don't step out, if we don't do what the Lord asks us to do, we will never experience those miracles. It will never happen. Why everybody has a miracle, everybody has something in life, but in my life is nothing? Because we don't ask. He says, ask, it shall be given to you. It's that simple. And the Lord is willing to give us what we ask. But don't ask for a small church, as I did, you know. Ask Him what He wants us to do or me to do. And may this year, 2025, be a year of faith. Allowing Him and asking Him to face our Goliath in our life, allowing Him to open before us the Jordan, allowing us to go on the dry bed of our situations, and you know that the Lord, He will fight for us, and He will fight for us the fight that He chooses to do. Sometimes we fight, but we fight the wrong way, so we need to allow Him to fight the right way. But there will be always a fight. Because the enemy is crushed, but is not destroyed. Until Jesus comes back, there will be always a fight. But we need to allow Jesus to fight. It's interesting that when the stones were picked up, when the monument was built in the midst of the Jordan, and you know, this is a story for the children. Then in verse 18 says, and it came to pass when the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priest's feet touched the dry land, the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all its banks as before. It's very interesting that by faith they stepped into the water and it parted. And as soon as they left the Jordan, the waters came back. I wish that we all experience this in our lives this year, that we go by faith, not by sight. And numbers are good, and we should calculate the cost, but sometimes people misunderstand the story in the New Testament where Jesus says, it's not the one who builds the house that he sits down and calculates the cost. He doesn't calculate the amount, but he calculates the cost, what it takes him to follow Jesus. It's very important to understand that when I give my life to Jesus, I give it all or none. And if I give it all to Him, then He will take care of that. Maybe not the way I expect or the way I prayed, but His way, but He will do that. But I have to allow Him to lead me the way He sees fits the best for me. And not to rebel, and not to make my own putsch like in Russia, you know. But allowing Him, Lord, lead me and I will follow you. I will follow you because you are in charge of the leading. And may the Lord give us the faith that we step into the water, trusting the Lord will part, will take away the problems they are there. And the same way as they left the Jordan, it came back. You know what also says? When the people saw that when the Jordan parted, the enemy's hearts fainted them for fear. Can you imagine? Thank you. Fainted them for fear. Did you know that the Lord, when He's with you, that people are afraid of you? Not that you are scary, but they see His power in your lives. And don't you want to experience His power in your life and see how things changing? When now we live in the winter, it's cold, but the spring is coming. The green, We don't want to be a Christian who comes once a week to church, but we want to be vibrant, living, Apostle Paul's living letters read by the people. May the Lord give us this faith that we go because we trust Him, that He is able to part and remove all the obstacles, allowing Him to be our Lord and in collaboration with Him walk hand in hand. Not by sight, but by faith. Amen.